Hey, and we're back by popular demand, and I suppose also obligation, because I call it the last one, part one. I did not think this was going to take multiple parts, but if this is going to be the format this takes, then I guess I'll just go full ramble, and we'll cover every goddamn topic I feel like covering, and it'll take however many parts it does, because this feels good, and I'm enjoying doing this, and this is what I like to do, is do these extensive discussions on things at times, and it seems people are game for it, because not only did the last one get more views than the finale of my actual Let's Play of the game, but looks like it's got like a 98% positive ratio on responses so far, so that's a good sign. It's funny because I beat Witcher 3 on Death March difficulty, but it was really only the Andromeda playthrough that felt like a Death March by the end, huh? So let's get one thing out of the way. It's kind of tangentially related, but this is apparently a podcast about tangentially related things anyway, and I'm sure we'll be going on to tangents into the previous Mass Effect games, and this one also, just like we did last time, while also spending a half an hour on minor details, because I will just dwell on whatever I feel like. But people have been asking me about Anthem, the new and upcoming BioWare game. I don't have a lot to offer on that game, mainly because it's not out yet, and when a game's not out, I generally try not to expose myself too much to it, and I try not to spoil things about it, and then just experience what happens. Am I worried? Yes. Do I think it will cause this kind of discussion? No. For two reasons. One, it's not the fourth game in a franchise, let alone a franchise that has spawned, like, comic books and spin-off things and 100 and novels and, like, tons of other tangentially related things that keep expanding it on top of the four games. Like, Andromeda had a universe to screw up and details and so on, because Mass Effect was a detail-oriented universe, and so when it waded through swinging wildly, there was a lot of branches to catch. Anthem is a new thing, so whatever it is, it can't offend an existing thing aside from the concept of BioWare fans, of course, and people expecting BioWare games, which those people might be disappointed by what ends up happening. Because the other thing is, the other reason why I don't think it'll spawn this kind of discussion is because it's a multiplayer, cooperative shooter RPG, which, heavy air quotes there. Massive, infinite air quotes around RPG. We'll see. I would love for it to be a real RPG. Really, I would. And I'm interested into seeing what they might do that might make it count as being an RPG. Interestingly, like specifically the BioWare, or at least some other studio called BioWare, because saying BioWare is meaningless now because so many separate companies and groups of people are all called BioWare. They're all working in parallel with each other and stuff like that. That's just such a mess, and who the hell knows. But some version of BioWare somewhere made a game called Old Republic, not to be confused with Knights of the Old Republic, but it's also reasonable to confuse it because they're the same universe, both being Star Wars and the same continuity of a series of BioWare games on Star Wars. But Old Republic specifically was the one that, instead of getting KOTOR 3, we got an MMO. Still not happy about that, but they did something interesting, which is that they did multiplayer conversations. It was stupid, like really stupid, but they tried. Like, hats off and applause for injecting BioWare-style dialogue trees into an MMORPG, and then letting people that are in a multiplayer party together essentially, like, roll the dice, quite literally. For those that don't know, Old Republic had the same dialogue trees that old BioWare games do, and the Knights of the Old Republic games did. But if you were in a party, and it wasn't like a quest that was specific to you, like your specific single-player storyline, if it was any sort of general thing, like a random quest or a raid or something, whenever you were picking dialogue options or making decisions, because there were decisions in that game, everyone in your party would pick a choice, and then it would do a dice roll for everyone, like 1 to 100, and whoever had the highest number, their choice was the canonical one that actually got read out by the voice actor and went forward. And so the cutscenes themselves were kind of neat because whoever won the dice roll, the camera would cut to them, and they would say the response, and the conversation would continue. And it was, at its best, it was really cool because it would organically jump between all these different characters as if they were all there, instead of the usual BioWare thing where only protagonist man is the real one that's in the conversation, and everybody else, the 2 or 3 party members, are usually just sitting in the background unless they have very specific pre-scripted dialogue. So having a situation where you have 4 protagonist man people competing against each other could lead to some interesting dialogue and sort of like a Guardians of the Galaxy ensemble cast sort of feeling. That was cool, and I liked that. But it's not like who's going to pick a quirky response to a situation. It was you were making actual decisions in those situations. Like, do we blow up the ship and kill everybody in a Sith kind of way, or do we save all the babies like a Jedi? So the fact that if your party wasn't a cohesive moral unit, massively divergent dialogue choices could be picked from decision to decision, and then everyone canonically is just stuck doing that thing was weird. Like, really weird. Because like you would just get stuck doing evil things as a good guy or good things as an evil guy because the party member who felt like doing that stuff won, and it's blah. It didn't really work on a storytelling perspective necessarily, but it was a cool attempt. And at the very least, that does make that work more as an RPG than most MMOs are, which is fetch quest games where you just do tasks. And yeah, they're just open world games. They're GTA with swords and magic, essentially, where you just do preordained tasks over and over again, but we call it an RPG because reasons. So after what they did with Old Republic, Anthem might do something interesting too, and I look forward to seeing what their solution is. But I can't help but feel like the more likely thing is going to be that it's just going to be like Borderlands and Destiny, which, for the record, are not RPGs. They're not. They're this sub-thing that we have agreed on as a community for some reason to call RPGs. For some reason. By the way, this is not completely tangentially unrelated to Andromeda, because it touches on some elements of Andromeda itself and also just the concept of RPGs, which is kind of important to nail down a little bit because it's something I care about a lot and it bothers me. And to be clear, being an RPG or not being an RPG is not a judgment of quality. You can have the RPG tag stripped from your game and it can be equally as good as it was before it was stripped from a game. Like, that's not what I mean. I love tons of non-RPGs, and that's fine. In fact, the distinction of whether or not I think they're RPGs doesn't matter in this case because I quite like Destiny. I have a grand old time playing it, and I quite dislike Borderlands and don't like playing it. The whether or not I count them as RPGs is irrelevant. But it's important to highlight this element here because they're not RPGs. They're games that have level up systems and Skinner's boxes, and that's important. For those who don't know, because I don't think we've covered it in this particular subforum, but we did do an entire podcast on Skinner boxes in the Four Nerds Save the Universe podcast thing. Skinner's box was this thing where there was this. Okay, I'm going to butcher the shit out of this because I'm not going to sit here and research it right now on the spot, but because the details are lost a little bit. But essentially, there was a psychological professor or researcher or something that would put animals, in this case, in an operant conditioning chamber. And they'd be in this cage, and if they pressed a button, they'd get food. And he realized that if they gave you food every time you pressed the button, then you would only press it enough to get fed, and then you'd move on, which, sure, makes sense. But if you gave it a random chance of giving you food, and sometimes it didn't give you food, or most times it didn't give you food, but occasionally it gave you food, that little pigeon or rat or whatever would press the shit out of that button, and they'd get fed like crazy, and they'd press it way too much, and then even after they were fed, they would keep pressing it, and like it's an operant conditioning chamber. It's a Skinner's box. It's gambling, literally. Well, not necessarily gambling, that it's only really losing time in favor of more food, but a random chance of more food. This is how many video games work. You do a thing over and over again, and there's a random chance of getting good or bad things. You kill dudes in Diablo, and a confetti pinata monster, like every enemy in Diablo is a pinata, and confetti weapons and items spew out of them when you hit them, and they rain all over the floor, and you get 50 garbage items and uncommons and gray items and bullshit that just clouds the screen. But every now and then you get that vertical beam, and that's where the endorphins shoot out, because you're like, oh my god, I got the vertical beam god ray, that means that it's a legendary, and you go identify that legendary, and you go through the loop of figuring out if it's a good legendary for you, and which is by the way is why Blizzard games reward you more and more frequently now than they used to, because shit used to be hard to get, these legendaries, but now you get a legendary every time you freaking play a Diablo game. But whatever. I'm not going to complain about getting to the top of a loot grind easier, because I don't like the loot grind in the first place. But a loot grind is not an RPG. It is just a mechanic designed to make you keep playing a game. It's Hearthstone. It's Facebook games. It's anything that wants you to... It's Candy Crush. Candy Crush is not a fair video game, in case we're unclear on that somehow. Candy Crush is supposed to make you fail. Like, first, it's easy at first to get you hooked for a while, and I've played this, by the way, just to figure out what this game was like, because people kept talking about it. It's designed to make you feel like it's easy to get through it for a long-ass time, and then eventually it gets really hard, but then you have an occasional chance of essentially RNG winning the match for you, because you have no control over what gems fall in when you destroy things. They just fall in at random, but out of nowhere, a bullshit, ridiculous combo will just spew across the screen and magical music plays, and oh my god, that was amazing. Congrats to me. That random chance of success and feeling good, whether it be gambling for success at a game to move on to the next level, or gambling to get better weapons, or just fighting things to periodically get told that you're doing good all the time. All these things are various forms of Skinner boxes. Like that's one of the systems that comes up in Elder Scrolls, is that Elder Scrolls has 500 different skills. So no matter what you're doing all the time, you always feel like you're progressing at something, and they make sure to tell you every time you progress. They don't let that happen in the background. In some menu you have to check. It goes on the screen. And as each game comes out, the announcement of your progression gets more and more dramatic. Like, it used to be like a tiny text feed in the corner, I believe, during Morrowind. By the time you get to Skyrim, it's a full screen unveiling, like a THX logo across the screen to tell you that you got 37 abjuration, or whatever the fuck. I don't think that's even one of them. It's fine. Conjuration, athletics. Then they just keep adding more skills, and they keep announcing your progress. That's why Borderlands just keeps layering on more and more progression systems, where it's like, now you got badass points. It's another thing that also levels up. Now you have 1% better crit chance, or 0.1% better crit chance. It's like incredibly minor upgrades, but it's another thing where they can celebrate that you've progressed all the time. And Destiny has its loot drops, and Fortnite is a nightmare of having, like, just try opening Fortnite, I dare you, if you have access to it. There are like 17 separate progression systems, because the game just wants to make you constantly feel like you're progressing in some way, to the point of literally having pinatas, which kind of breaks the metaphor when you're just actually doing it, but okay. But the point is, I want to invite you all to explore the concept of role-playing games, because go play Dungeons and Dragons. Find friends that know Dungeons and Dragons. See if you can sit in on a session or even join them and learn the game a bit. Or if you don't want to do that, I have examples for you. On my channel, there's a series called Dungeons and Dragons Grave of Man. Check it out. And if you don't want my version, or you think that this is plugging or whatever, go check out somebody else's stuff. You can check out Critical Role from Geek and Sundry. That's Matt Mercer and a bunch of voice actors getting together. So I'm sure it's good. I've never watched it, but it gets recommended the most. There's Splattercats D&D channel. Roll for it. What's the other one? Team 4-Star, the people that do Dragon Ball Z Abridged, which are also voice actors at this point. They also do a D&D campaign. I want you to, for science, just tell me what the point of those sessions are, these D&D campaigns, because this is the foundation of our modern understanding of role-playing and what this concept is. Look at what these games are and what you do in them and what the point of them is, and you will find that numbers are not used the same way they are in video games that are called RPGs that are not RPGs. Because yes, you do have like a charisma score with a modifier, and when you do a thing, you might roll a dice for that to happen, and so on. But making numbers bigger is not the point of D&D, at least not most of the time. Generally, you are in a scenario with your friends, and you're playing a bunch of characters, and those characters have personalities. They have personalities and quirks and allegiances and alignments of being good or evil and lawful and chaotic, and they have these hopefully flaws of some kind, and they have a class and they have equipment, but the point isn't to make that class better and the equipment gooder or whatever all the time. Like that's not the primary goal. The point is that you have this complicated rule system, and every character has a bunch of distinguishing features like their class and their skills and their prepared spells and their charisma score and so on and so forth, their proficiency bonus, their level, because those are the universe. Because what makes D&D separate from just pure make-believe is that it has rules. Because otherwise you have the issue of like, I got you, nuh-uh, I got a super force field. Well, I got a force field piercing laser. And like that bullshit where like 5-year-olds are yelling at each other and playing make-believe, which, fine, let them experience childhood. But in D&D, you have a bunch of rules and things that go on there because that adds stakes and weight to everything. You have hit points. When you're out of hit points, you die, or you go unconscious, and you can eventually become dead if no one else takes care of you at that point, or some scenario or storytelling thing doesn't save you at that point. Like, you, as a character, have stakes. If you get crit for all of your health and you're down, you could lose that character forever, permanently. So, like, you care about all of these rules and these things, and, like, you have strengths and weaknesses because those affect your decisions and the scenario. And things have stakes because you actually have to roll a dice, and there is a % chance of things happening. It's like the XCOM system of, like, you have an 80% chance of shooting that dude. That's not 100. Do you take it? Or the situations where you're totally fucked and you have a 20% chance of hitting, but, like, if you don't take the shot, then someone's going to die, so do you take the shot anyway, even though it's probably not going to hit, and you just go for it, and things go bad, and maybe you get hit by Overwatch, and there's 500 variables. Like, those are stakes and tension. Like, those are interesting, and you'll see when you watch me play with Bird and Shell and Wander, or you watch any of these other campaigns, or you play it yourself, you'll realize the point of D&D and role-playing is to play a role. You inhabit a character. That character has strengths and weaknesses and goals and vices and so on. And you play through scenarios in a form of what's essentially improv. And you try to succeed, hopefully, at whatever you're trying to do. And that is the point. The numbers, the mechanics, those are all things that facilitate your investment in this universe and what you do. Whereas, by the way, this is going on way longer than I thought it would, but fuck it at this point. We're already in it. That stuff determines your investment. So that's not just make-believe, or like, I got a shield-piercing laser, and all that stuff where kids just make up stuff and keep arms racing and everything like that. And the act of progressing your character and getting more stuff, finding a magic sword that's possessed by the soul of a horse, or hitting level 10 and getting a different form of shapeshifting or whatever the hell. That stuff is both your reward, but also further customization. It lets you more and more inhabit the complicated role of your particular character by escalating things over time. And also feels like an earned reward because you probably played for like 4 hours, or maybe even more. You might have played over the course of multiple weeks of sessions to get that one extra level. And that one level feels like it's a notch on your belt that's genuinely earned, and it's part of your story. And that's the important thing, is that this arc is part of a story, and the level ups and loots are all background details to thousands of decisions and role-playing. Borderlands, Destiny, they are shooter campaigns with Skinner box attached to them. That's all they are. and you can take it or leave it, and you can be a glutton for Skinnerbox like Wanderbot, who just loves to watch numbers go up and kind of mindlessly grind at Warframe all day. But don't mistake games like Warframe and Borderlands and Destiny as being RPGs. You do not play a role, at least not any more than you do in any other video game, which I think is part of the reason why we get confused about this for other reasons. Not only is there the trappings of an RPG elements, we'll call them, the ability to level up and get skill points and stuff like that, but there's the fact that in every video game you're playing a role, technically. The question is whether or not you have any wiggle room in that role to do things at all. Can you make decisions? In many ways, games like Thief and Dishonored and System Shock and Deus Ex, which sometimes call themselves RPGs and sometimes don't, are more RPG-like than games that do call themselves RPGs because of the fact that they are games where you make decisions and play a role, and playthroughs vary from person to person. Destiny does not change from person to person. It's not significant that some people have an invincibility bubble and some people can have a teleport stab. That is not a significant change. That is exactly as RPG as playing Mad Max or Batman Arkham Asylum or, frankly, WB open world games, apparently. Shadow of Mordor. Watch Dogs has a level up screen and a skill tree. That doesn't make it an RPG, but these games are exactly as RPG as Destiny and Borderlands are. Games where you make no decisions, where you do preordained tasks and you loot grind and you get arbitrary level ups to get into a skill tree. That is not role playing. And you can enjoy it all you want, but that's not what this thing is. And it's important because people that are fans of BioWare games are clearly fans of RPGs because that's all they make. And so a concern about Anthem is that it might not be a real RPG, and I won't know until I get my hands on it for sure, because you can't trust any E3 announcements and promises and whatnot, because according to E3, Mass Effect 1 was a game all about exploration and uncharted worlds and stuff like that, just like they said about Andromeda, and thankfully it turned out to be something else that I liked a lot, but it sure as hell was not that game. So Anthem could be fun. Will it be an RPG? Will it be a universe that I get captivated in? Or will it be another loot grinder? I don't know. And if it is just another multiplayer shooter, then it really comes down to how much I like the actual shooting, basically. I like Destiny because I like Halo. I wish Destiny was another Halo. Like, not the Halo universe, but I wish that it was just a shooter campaign that you played with your friends, because Halo didn't need loot to be good, and loot would not have improved Halo. But they decided to give it loot for some reason. Fine, I guess. I don't like loot grinders. It's a form of just making you play the same content over and over again, which is just a bummer. And that's not a direction I want any franchise to go in necessarily. And in fact, I don't engage in loot grinding in my RPGs. You'll probably notice. Funny how that's there, because people say really bullshit things. We're like, if you don't like loot grinds, you just don't like RPGs. It's like, no, you just have been misguided about what you think an RPG is. Go play Baldur's Gate or Divinity or Deus Ex or anything that actually has you playing roles and making decisions, whether it be rigid dialogue trees like BioWare does it, or much more organic 0451 things like the old Spyglass games and stuff like that, or even Dark Souls, where you're actually affecting the world and story in ways that are, instead of being dialogue driven, are systematic, where you can attack something and that changes a storyline and stuff like that. That is an RPG. But anyway, that was way longer than I thought it was going to be, but I just want to comment on Anthem, and it turned into that whole discussion, but that's fine. It just means we get more parts out of this, apparently. You're welcome? That was, yeah. I hate it when people are like, you don't like grinding and you don't like loot treadmills? You're clearly not an RPG fan. I'm like, you are a wrong person, and it's a problem for my genre that I like because you're ruining it. So, first of all, and this might bother you, but I'm going to revisit previous territory. Part of this is because of comments. I've lost track of the original comments a little bit now, but back when the original video went up, part 1 of Mass Effect Andromeda Spoilercast, I took notes on comments people were making, and also just and not all of it was comments, but also just other thoughts I had afterwards. And so there's actually follow-up to be made on the discussions we had last time. The Geth telescope and the QECs. We're not 100% done with them yet. And the Quarian arc. So first of all, we talked about the Quarian arc and how it doesn't make sense for 500 billion different reasons on a mechanical level. I was talking about the logistical levels of like how you would even make a Quarian arc and why they would make a Quarian arc and so on and so forth, and how those all didn't make sense. Comments quickly pointed out something that was also really important that I skipped over, which is that every arc has a pathfinder, and that pathfinder interfaces with a copy of Sam. Sam is an AI, and the AI is housed on every individual arc that interfaces with that particular pathfinder, so each one has its own AI. That means a Quarian arc would have a Quarian pathfinder and a Quarian AI. Do you see the problem there? Do you? Do I need to put like a spyglass over that particular issue? The fact that the Quarians are entirely defined as a species, as being this like forced nomad race because they spoiled their entire original home planet by creating AI. And that AI drove them off their home planet and wiped out their society, and now they're essentially like a city floating in space, hoping to one day recapture their home world, and endlessly having this feud against their self-created AI. And they're also largely the reason why AI research is illegal throughout the entire galaxy, because no one wants to create this problem again, which frankly kind of turns out to be right. Like, whether you're pro-Geth or anti-Geth, it's still kind of right in that, like, the Reapers are also another form of AI that was also here to fuck everyone up. So, like, the idea that a Quarian would be okay with being a Quarian Pathfinder is, like, horrifying. And a huge mess. And by the way, just to talk about how badly done this entire Pathfinder situation is and how poorly done the Andromeda Initiative is and so on, AI research is illegal in the Milky Way, and the inclusion of AI in Andromeda Initiative is relatively secret and hush-hush, and no one really knows about it aside from the Pathfinders and the main leadership, and it kind of gets revealed as details over time, and people aren't super aware of it across the board, which is a plot point in Andromeda because there's an entire side quest chain where there's people that think AI are evil, and they're trying to get rid of the AI that's inside you and free you from it because they think that you're being held prisoner by it, and so on and so forth, whereas you're quite fond of having Sam in your head one way or another in this game. Could you imagine that plot line on the Quarian arc? Because if there was a Quarian arc with a Quarian Pathfinder and everyone suddenly became aware of the fact there was an AI on the ship running everything, that ship blows up. Like, one way or another, emotionally or physically, like, that is a doomed prospect and the dumbest idea ever. And I failed to touch on it because I was the stupidity of this topic was hidden behind 500 other stupid things, so I didn't peel back enough layers of this goddamn stupid onion to highlight how stupid this other element was, which, kudos for pointing that out. I think I'm pretty sure people pointed that out last time, and that wasn't me that thought of it afterwards, but yeah, that's a big deal. Which is why it's so frustrating that this, like, Mass Effect is a detail-oriented universe. I'll highlight that again, because it's important. Because that shows how not detail-oriented this game was how willing they are just to throw out this idea of a Quarian arc like it's nothing, even though the Quarians don't have the resources to make an arc, and they don't have a reason to make an arc, and they have 500 reasons not to make an arc, and also the arc is secretly their enemy because it's full of AI. Like, the fact that they just throw that away at you in a sentence and expect you just to eat it and not question it at all, and then move on with your life, shows how haphazard it shows that Andromeda is either super haphazardly handled, or it just doesn't care about these kinds of details. And there's a decent chance that's both. A reoccurring thing that people bring up is the idea that like Andromeda is a game made by programmers, which sounds about right. It's probably why it's so side quest driven and full of so much disposable content, is that the best RPGs have a very strong writer or director presence of some kind, a very strong passion for storytelling and world building to make this whole thing work and feel cohesive and like it has a point to it, and so on. But when you let programmers make a game, they're so busy making the game, like oftentimes their way of creating content is to create little packages of content that can be slotted in easily because it makes their job easier. And oftentimes they're not really talented writers. So you get very by the numbers side quests of, go here, kill that guy. I made that level already, so let's make a quest that correlates with that particular space where I already like populated it with enemies and stuff like that. It's filler. It's easy to make, and like sub teams can easily do this without coordinating with too many people. But it leads to the world being really detached and messy. We'll probably get into that later when I talk about the actual gameplay and actual open world stuff, because that's a whole topic of its own with its own bullet points and everything. But like that speaks to how haphazardly the world building and like plot cohesion is. That the way that the Andromeda and Dragon Age Inquisition have like such a detached main story, and that the so many of the side quests are so self-contained and don't touch anything else, and that everything feels so detached. And then like Andromeda has so much contradictory lore that is such a mess, is likely because of that kind of setup. But that's something I don't have a direct insight on, but it seems like a reasonable proposition that people bring up. But we can talk about the Geth telescope again. So we talked before about how the Geth telescope is a weird thing that they hand wave away and doesn't make any sense. But there's additional detail of, like, it didn't have a reason to exist. Like, the Geth telescope serves no purpose in the story of Mass Effect Andromeda. Think about that. All the Geth telescope does is allow them to somehow break time and space to somehow view Andromeda faster by like sucking light or something. But as we arrive in Andromeda, we find out that every single planet is poisoned and destroyed and is not habitable. And so the Geth telescope and all of its information is wrong. So not only is it a self-contradictory nightmare that is unexplained and you can't really make sense of how they got it or how it works or any of the other stuff, but it's ultimately not actually giving them valuable information. It would have actually been easier and more elegant just to be like, oh no, our information was so out of date because of how far away Andromeda is that like we just were wrong about what it's like, and oh no, bad stuff has happened. Like, having a Geth telescope that provides this assurance that you can magically see across the galaxy and across to another galaxy instantaneously or whatever, and then having that be wrong anyway, is like, because in this case, because of the 600-year travel time, like, why? Who cares then? Like, you introduce this broken plot point that doesn't affect anything. And while we're at it, why can't the Geth telescope just teleport them to Andromeda? Seriously. Mass Effect relays are instantaneous teleportation. If you're already going to break the lore and allow a Mass Effect relay cluster somehow to become a telescope, why can't you turn it into a Mass Effect cannon that just fires stuff one way, just a one-way long distance trip? It honestly wouldn't be that. It would actually be almost less of a divergence. This idea that like, yeah, normally Mass Effects are relay to relay, but we wired a bunch of them together and now it can fire you like a cannon, but you're not coming back. Like, is that really less reasonable? It's exactly as reasonable of a lore break as the original thing was, and that's a bummer. And I know this is exhaustive exhausting and redundant how I keep hitting the same points over and over again, but I want to highlight these because it's important to me to highlight how important details are in the Mass Effect universe, and I am going to highlight that by doing the most annoying thing I could pretty much possibly do, which is I am now going to read the Mass Relay Wikipedia page, the masseffect.wikia.com/wiki/mass_relay page, or at least excerpts from it, because I'll get to the reason afterwards. You'll see. Mass relays are mass transit devices scattered throughout the Milky Way, usually located within star systems. They form an enormous network allowing interstellar travel. Hailed as one of the greatest achievements of the extinct Protheans, a mass relay can transport starships instantaneously to another relay within the network, allowing for journeys that would otherwise take years or even centuries with only FTL drives. Mass relays consist of two 15-kilometer or 9-mile long curved metal arms surrounding a set of revolving gyroscopic rings 5 kilometers across. These rings contain a massive blue glowing core of element 0. The relays are made of an unknown but incredibly resilient material, the same material that the Citadel is built from, and are protected by a quantum shield that renders them nearly impervious to damage by locking their structure in place at the subatomic level. They are even capable of surviving a supernova's wake without being damaged. They are cold objects that don't emit heat or radiation, unlike starships, making them difficult to find if their position changes. Some relays, like the Charon relay, are gravitationally anchored to celestial bodies. Others appear to be out in space and are carefully tracked. Mass relays function by creating a virtually mass-free corridor of space-time between each other. This can propel a starship across enormous distances that would take centuries to traverse, even at FTL speeds. Before a vessel can travel, the relay must be given the amount of mass to transit by the ship's pilot before it is moved into the approach corridor. When a relay is activated, it aligns itself with the corresponding relay before propelling the ship across space. There are two kinds of mass relay, primary and secondary. Primary relays can propel a ship thousands of light years, but only link to one other relay, its partner. Secondary relays can link to any other relay over a short distance, only a few hundred light years. After the Rachni Wars, spacefaring species won't open a primary relay without knowing where it links to, in case they run into another powerful and hostile species like the Rachni. This caused a rift when the Turians found human pioneers, ignorant of this Citadel Council prohibition, trying to open a mass relay they could find while exploring trying to open any mass relay they could find while exploring the relay network, eventually leading to the First Rachni War. Many mass relays are currently dormant for unknown reasons, though they can be easily reactivated. A Prothean data cache found on Mars led humans to a mass relay encased in ice and orbiting Pluto, previously thought to be a moon called Charon, which the Charon relay was eventually named after. A piece of Prothean artwork depicting a mass relay, the Relay Monument, can be found on the Citadel Presidium. It has been interpreted as either a symbol of Prothean vanity, expressing the relays as their means to build a galaxy-wide empire, or possibly a symbol of galactic unity, which the relay network also embodies. Tali Zora Naraya claims that after their long voyage through the galaxy, the Quarians have also come to appreciate the aesthetic value of the mass relays. An Asari matriarch once suggested that the Asari should build new mass relays of their own, but it is unknown if modern galactic civilization actually has the capacity to do so. Origins. The mass relays, despite common belief, were created not by the Protheans, but by the Reapers, as stated by Sovereign. The Protheans were merely one of the many alien races to find the relays and the Citadel, and take advantage of them. When the Reapers wiped out the Protheans, the Asari were the next race to find the relays through the thousands of years later. According to Sovereign, by using the relays, galactic civilizations evolve along paths the Reapers desire. In addition, the relays serve to accelerate the rate at which the civilizations advance, shortening the time between Reaper harvests. However, the Protheans did have a keen interest in the relays and managed to crack the secret behind their operation. This enabled them to build the conduit before they were destroyed by the Reapers. Commander Shepard also discovers the Citadel itself is an enormous inactive space relay leading to dark space. as well as the control center for all the relays, enabling the Reapers to sever travel between clusters. Its reactivation, fittingly, is more complex than that of an ordinary mass relay, requiring either a coordinated effort by the Keepers or manual intervention by a Reaper. Then there's the whole thing about the destroyed one from Alpha Relay. We'll just skip that part, because frankly, I don't like the Arrival DLC, and it's actually an example of... At times, the Arrival DLC is almost like an example of contradiction of the lore in some ways, which is frustrating, but no, we should... in short, there's the issue of, like, if you blow up a mass relay, which is problematic because the previous parts were all like, that's impossible, but, maybe the Protheans were figuring out details about them, so maybe we did too. Maybe we found out how to destroy one. But that led to the gap of, like, if the Alpha Relay blows up and kills everybody, then, like, why did nobody... Like, what happens to the Mass Effect 3 ending when all the relays blow up? Whoops. But anyway, the reason why I read all that stuff is because I want you to think, like, you're probably thinking along the way how many plot points there were in that. Like, this was essentially reading a codex entry about a particular lore element of how the universe works in Mass Effect back in the Milky Way. The Milky Way? Did I say Ray? Way? Whatever. All of this was mined over and over again for story beats. So many times. And that's important, because every detail can be explored for new meaning and interesting things. First of all, we thought they were Prothean. Turns out they're Reapers. They're not instead of being the remnants of a fallen society and essentially a gift to anyone who finds it, they're actually a spider's web. Whoops. That's the switch from Prothean to Reaper. It lets you travel instantaneously, but it's not just magic. Like, Mass Effect as a concept is space magic, essentially. But it's space magic that had some kind of rules to it. Much like how biotics that use Mass Effect fields in order to use space magic, in a more literal sense, or the Force, basically, there's differences from race to race. Like, these people can't use biotics. These people can use it intrinsically, so these people need implants. And then you have the issue with Caden, where, like, he has L2 implants, and other people have L3 implants, and, like, there's different, like, Apple iPhone generations of implants that have different negative and positive consequences for the people that use them. And, like, there's actual, like, hardware manufacture life cycles going on here. Like, even that had details to it. But we also have this interesting thing, which is something that I actually didn't even fully pick up on and understand, this difference between a secondary and primary relay. There's two different types of relays that work differently. One of them is a short-range hub that explains how you can easily be essentially transfer and have these, like, complicated pathways, whereas the other one is a long-range single-target back and forth thing. Like, the difference between... They're essentially like the difference between streets that cars drive on and paths that, like, trains go by, essentially, or planes even, where, like, that you go from airport to airport versus just driving wherever you feel like. That kind of difference in detail. And this isn't just a weird explanation, like, this isn't like the reloads that Mass Effect 1 and so on have, like, the difference in, like, thermal clips. This is actually a thing that's mined for major plot beats, both in the lore and storyline and stories you're going to encounter individually along the way. Like, we're talking about how the Rachni were something that were encountered because somebody opened a primary relay, and on the other side was an invasive species, and that led to a massive war. And so now you have this new rule: don't open primary relays until you know what's on the other side, because you could doom everybody. There could be, like, sure, we're the Citadel, but there could be another thing just as big and bad as the Citadel that hates us on the other side of the galaxy, and we could be one primary relay activation away from encountering them. Like, that's a reasonable fear to have after multiple reinforcements of that kind of idea. And then you also have, like, it not only does it explain the Rachni, it actually explains, as a plot point, the First Contact War, which is also a fun detail, the fact that the humans call it the First Contact War and think it's this big, dramatic, important thing, and they make a big deal about it, whereas the Turians make a small deal of it because they're kind of a warlike race to begin with, but also it just wasn't that big of a fight for them, honestly. It was only monumental for us because it was a first contact war, whereas for them they're like, humans were being a problem over there for a while, and it went away eventually. But the idea that for us, we were going out and discovering space, and we were enjoying our hero's journey of encountering this fallen society's technology and the wonders that it brings us, whereas the Turians were chasing after us like a parent trying to console a toddler, when the toddler's just beating its head against walls and hurting itself and running towards fire and sharp objects. And that was essentially, in many ways, what the First Contact War was the idea that, like, the Turians were like, no, oh shit, they're activating primary relays, like, that will fuck everything up if they get the wrong one. Like, that's great. That's great. That's a great background for stuff. That's both a cohesive storyline of dealing with this central mechanic that makes your universe work, while also defining the interpersonal politics between different races and their kingdoms and their empires and whatnot, and how they deal with each other, and how different things mean different things from different perspectives because of how asymmetrical these different races are, which, God, I missed that so much, because we talked about last time, how like in Andromeda's universe, the races are all just one group, so that's gone, and boy do I miss it, because that was great. And it's important because this is all details about how you can mine this. If you set up a cohesive universe, much like when you talk about like your stat sheet in Dungeons and Dragons and the rules of the universe in Dungeons and Dragons, you create role-playing scenarios where story can happen, oftentimes just by doing mechanics. Like, it actually can, once you have the world, it can be surprisingly easy to come up with plot points that work within that world because you have an existing thing. And if you just respect the rules of your universe, then there's a lot of things that have natural conclusions and natural outcomes that come to not only interesting scenarios and interesting storylines, but also storylines that feel authentic, like because they fit within the world as opposed to just being randomly made up, like that one Hanar's movies, basically. Like, this is great. It's great knowing that there's primary and secondary relays. It's great to know that there's this policy about primary relays, and then there's the role that the relays took place, the role the relays had in both first contact with humans and first contact with the Arachni. And there's even this ongoing plot point of, like, there's that monument in the middle of the Presidium. What does it mean? Is it just were the Protheans like this warlike race, and this was like a symbol of their achievement and their power, or was this just like an aesthetically beautiful symbol of unity and peace? Because in a way, the ability to span and bring everyone together is also a potential interpretation of the relays. And the answer is, psych, it's the conduit, you're fucked, because it was actually a teleport spot that lets the Reapers into the Citadel, and this is the center of the spider web. And like, all these different angles for one thing. It's a fucking statue in the middle of the Citadel, and it has more character and more plot significance than virtually anything you encounter in so much of Mass Effect Andromeda, and that's important. And the reason I'm highlighting this, then at least the next topic I want to go on from this topic, is the QECs, because that is one of the biggest missed opportunities in the entire game for me. Because we've talked about these other lacking detail points, the Geth telescope, the Quarian arc. The thing about those things is they don't matter. I know I've talked about them a lot, but they don't matter individually. The Quarian arc and the Geth telescope never affect the story in any way at any point of the entire thing. They are just symptoms of what I'm getting at, because they are throwaway details that are haphazardly tossed out there by who knows even who. Does this game even I'm not even entirely sure at times if the game has a dedicated writing staff, or it was just like a bunch of like crowdsourced ideas throughout the entire staff of what to do and with plot points. But like those are haphazard details thrown out there because this is not detail oriented, and that's a problem, because when you have a concrete universe with details, you can mine those details for plot points, like we talked about with the mass relays and how that can expand things. And in fact, on a regular basis, expansions to Mass Effect games and sequels to Mass Effect games were often expanding on what mass relays do and what they can mean. And like that was supposed to be a big deal, like how in Arrival, mass relay explodes, and we know that an exploding mass relay apparently takes out an entire solar system, and that's cataclysmic. That's horrifying. And the fact that the ending of Mass Effect 3 doesn't fully respect that and doesn't seem to consider that is a massive problem, but we talked about that last time.
Also, the scenario of the Omega Relay facilitates the entire climax and final conflict of Mass Effect 2.
But there's a specific plot point that they throw out there that is another one of these throwaway lines that they barely acknowledge, but it does affect the story. The Geth telescope doesn't matter. The Quarian Arc doesn't matter. QECs matter a lot. Like, they matter so much. And I'm not here to rag on the fact that, like, they're like, oh, communications are jammed, even though the entire point of QECs is they can't be jammed. And we've been over that. But I want to talk about how the quantum entanglement communicators that fed back from between the Andromeda Initiative and the Council space are dead. They don't work. Because the first question I had when we were going in on the Andromeda Initiative, I was like, we have contact with back home, right? Like, that was the first question I had. And I'm not even a member of this. I'm not a member of this world. This world's fictional. I'm a real person in a different reality. And the first question I had was, can we talk back home? Can we? Like, I know it's been 600 years, but like, how are they doing? It's the first question I have, because you time jump 600 years and you want to know what's happening in the Milky Way. It's a natural question to have. And I went hours trying to get an answer, and the game wasn't really giving it to me. Eventually you get a throwaway line that, like, yeah, the QECs seem to not be working that go back to Milky Way. I'm like, well, that's a big deal. Turns out the game doesn't think it's a big deal. They just don't bring it up. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, that? No. That right there is a major goddamn plot point. And this isn't like, we're not talking about plot holes this time around. We're not talking about like inconsistencies or like, man, that sure, you pull out that one brick and the entire Jenga tower falls down of the logic of the universe. Like, that's not the point of this. My point here is missed opportunity. This is a point of drama. This is a point of storytelling that should be mined for all it's worth, and the old Mass Effect would have, because it's important. You struck out on your own, knowing you would never go back to your home. You don't have the resources to make a jump back from Andromeda to the Milky Way. Everyone knew that. But they didn't know they'd be cut off from the Milky Way on a communication level. QECs are things people know about. And the idea you can't talk back to your home to even know what's left of it, that's horrifying. Something that every race in Mass Effect, and in fact humans in real life, are obsessed with, is their history and their heritage and their ancestors. We care about where we came from. We would absolutely care about the Milky Way after going to Andromeda. We want to know if it's safe. We want to know if it exists. Oh, by the way, minor plot point, just in case you hadn't thought about this yet. Humans, we live for like maybe 100 years. Solarians live for like 40 years. Asari and Krogan live for like 1,000 years. Isn't that interesting? Oh, how long was this journey? About 600 years? Okay, what was a primary plot point in, I don't know, the movie Interstellar by Christopher Nolan? Was it a family? Across space, and how love binds us across these great distances, and how maybe Matthew McConaughey really wants to talk to his daughter even when she's older. Because that's what the Krogans are going through, and that's what the Asari are going through. Their ancestors, we're not even talking about ancestors or grandchildren. Their family members that they knew in person are still alive in many cases. It's only been half a lifetime. You telling me that these people don't want to talk to their own family members back home, and that's not the first thing on their mind the moment they wake up, is like, oh wow, we're in Andromeda, this is incredible, and oh no, crisis. But also, Andromeda seems to take place over maybe the course of an entire year, like a bunch of time has passed, so they've surely come across the shock of like, gotten over the shock of like, oh no, the planet we arrived on is bad. At some point they're gonna be like, I want to talk to Jenny, or whoever the fuck. I want to talk to my sister. Is she a matriarch now? I'm curious. How are things going on back in the Milky Way? That should be hammered home constantly. And I don't know why it's not. It's either A, my previous thesis, or whatever the hell you want to call it, my hypothesis that like that this is just not that the developers of this particular Mass Effect game suddenly stopped caring about details, or it's just like a fear of talking about the original Mass Effect. But it can't be that. It can't be that, because I could almost buy that if they were like, there was a mandate, like, don't talk about the original trilogy. This is a new thing, either an attempt to not reopen the wounds of where Mass Effect 3 went with the end and how people responded to it, or because you want to make it feel like this thing can stand on its own and you don't want to constantly refer to the old one. They fucked that up, because not only do you have Cerberus in this game, you have Saeed's son shows up in this game. Okir's research shows up in this game. Multiple characters that are either related to there are multiple characters that are related to cast members of the original Mass Effect games. You have audio logs from Liara. You have multiple things that are direct references. You have a model of the Normandy SR2 on your shelf. Like, so clearly, we're not just cutting all ties with the original trilogy. So it must be the lack of detail, like I was originally hammering home, and that's a bummer, because that is an interesting plot point. The idea that people they knew to make a plot quest chain about the AI on board and talk about like how some people might have issues with an AI being on board. They knew to do that, but they didn't know to mine for drama what it means to be cut off from your home. Like, every now and then you have people go like, wow, we really left and we're not going back. Huh. Like, I knew it was permanent, but it's permanent. And like, there's like cute dialogue about that every now and then, like that moment of like, I'm a little sad about it, but I knew I would be, but I also didn't fully know exactly what it'd feel like until the moment I really felt it. But add to that a layer of like telling all these Krogan and Asari that they're family members that are still alive back home, they can't talk to them, and that this was a way more permanent and immediately like no turning back cut off point than they ever thought it would be. That should be a big deal. Not even dealing with the issue of like people should just generally care about whether or not like Earth still exists and stuff like that. Because yeah, we as players know what happened in Mass Effect 3 and how like they might be fucked. Maybe the Reapers won, or maybe everyone's a weird half bioorganic, half cybernetic hybrid. Fuck, it's really hard to get over the fact that there was an ending of Mass Effect 3 where there was like leaves that were covered in circuit boards, because that was a thing. I just want, in case you forgot how stupid that was, because holy fuck, the ending of Mass Effect 3 was stupid. They had jungle foliage with like circuit boards printed on them, because that's what organic and cybernetic being mixed together means. Fuck. Man, the synthesis ending, like, Mass Effect 3's ending was already stupid, but the synthesis ending should have never been allowed to exist, because it's so many degrees of stupider than the other two endings are, which are already stupid mainly because of how they're introduced. But oh my god, the synthesis ending is like a parody that someone would write as a joke, but it's real, and it's never going away. But like I understand that they don't want to fully touch on the infinite complexities of the nightmarish branching ending, and so I support the idea of the QECs not working as a plot point. But you need to use that as a plot point. You need to respect your universe and its people and its races and your players enough to have storylines about what happens when people are cut off from their home forever in a way that's way more permanent than anyone ever thought it would be. Because they thought they'd never go back, but the communication being cut off, that matters. people should be freaking out about what happened to the Milky Way, or why the QECs aren't working, or just the uncertainty of it. And we should have a member. We should have a crew member in particular, because all storytelling about the universe of Mass Effect is always handled through the crew, which is a good idea. It's convenient and tropey, but it's good. It's good how, ever since KOTOR, we've had a weird amalgamation of varieties of party members that are like different parts of your space galaxy that teach you about different elements, like the Mandalorians and stuff like that. Like having the Mandalorian on your crew in the old KOTOR game, like that was a good idea. Teaches you all about Boba Fett and how his stupid bounty hunter ass that was useless in those movies got retconned into being an entire species of assholes. Whatever. But like there should be a crew member who is just fucking torn up about how like they can't talk to their sister anymore and they don't know what happened to them, and they're like having nightmares about their fate, and like they regret every day that they ever came here. Like I don't care if it's a downer. Somebody should be freaked out about this, and it should be a crew member, so it feels personal. And maybe that's a detail that only shows up halfway through the game. Is like you have this crew member that is like maybe a little Jack edgy here and there, where they're just being a pain, and you don't really fully understand why they're being a dick. And much like how Jack has the explanation of you going through her loyalty mission and finding out about why she acts the way she does. This crew member should reveal finally in an outburst, like how it's been eating them up inside, that they can't talk to their home anymore, and that their family, they don't know what happened to them, but they would still be alive here based on like Asari or Krogan lifespans or something like that, and how fucked up it is that the QEC is gone. Like this could be a core plot point, and that was the power of Mass Effect 1 and Mass Effect 2 in particular, was that you had these various crew members from different walks of life, and and almost every single time when you delved into their backstory, you were learning more about the world and the capabilities of the sci-fi universe, and it was being mined for drama. Like, as much as I didn't really like her a lot of the time, Miranda is a very good example of this. Miranda is a character who is genetically engineered in this nightmare sci-fi future where Gattaca can happen for realsies. And you can have a weird fake not cybernetic, you can have a weird fake artificial person that is a real person, but like is like engineered like a replicant to be this weird alternate version, by which I mean the movie versions of replicants, not the book versions of replicants, because I guess the book versions of replicants are actually fundamentally different from humans and like can't have empathy, but like the movie ones are basically just people, but they die quickly, but they're super people. Miranda is super people, but she was made by a person, and that person is a fucked up monster and did horrible things to her and her family and has bad plans for them, and she has a sibling that is also going through that, and so she has motivations, and like she has the insecurities about whether or not she counts as a person, and whether or not any of the things she earns is hers. She has the fucked up ongoing thing of like how everyone has daddy issues in Mass Effect universe, and this is another case of that. And you have to deal with this antagonist and this baggage, and you need to track down this sister and get them to a safe place, and this speaks to another thing that we'll get to later, which is that like in Mass Effect universe, much like what I said about before about D&D characters should have quirks and flaws and motivations. Like they need to have a variety of different purposes and downsides and so on, so that they work as a character and they're memorable and they're interesting. Because as much as I was initially dismissive of Miranda, even as I played through the games multiple times, and as I played Mass Effect 2 this last time in particular, when I was replaying the trilogy before Andromeda came out, I really grew to like that storyline and how she has these specific flaws and weaknesses and insecurities, and she's a surprisingly human character, despite the fact that the camera angle treats her like she's just ass walking around, which is a bummer. But actually, like, I kind of learned to look past that specifically, and like look past how the camera treats a character sometimes, because there's that interesting thing where like there's a Lindsay Ellis video that's really good. If you haven't seen it yet, there's a whole Lindsay Ellis series called The Whole Plate, where she basically she's basically teaching a bunch of different topics on film studies and stuff like that, but through the filter of Michael Bay Transformers movies. And one of the ongoing things was about she started dealing with the concept of like feminist theory and talking about how specifically there's the female protagonist of the first two Transformers movies, played by, I don't remember the actress's name, but her name was a lot harder to forget back then for a while when it wouldn't go away. But the love interest character of the Mass Effect of the Transformers 1 movie, she is super capable, and she's the most effective character in the entire movie. She has a bunch of different skills, and she's determined, and she has character flaws, and she even has a story arc, an actual character arc in a Transformers movie, a franchise where no one has character arcs. In the first movie, she had a character arc. She was a fully fleshed out character, and she had an arc, and she had flaws, and she had skills, and she was determined, and she had a personality, and like everything about her was actually relatively well realized. But the entire movie treated her like a piece of ass. So every single camera angle was like, look at them boobs, look at her leaning over that car, look at that booty shorts, look at all this other stuff. And it's like, the camera didn't respect her. And so interestingly, audience reactions were always that she was just like this like slutty, pointless side character that doesn't do anything in the entire film and has no purpose. Whereas the script of the movie actually had a lot of purpose for her and an entire story arc planned for her and actually had her fleshed out as a character. It's just the camera didn't treat her the same way. So it didn't like that because the camera didn't treat her the same way, the audience didn't treat her the same way. And that was a problem. That's a problem that I realized I encountered at times with Miranda, and also other people encountered with Miranda, is that because the camera angle sometimes just frames her like, look at that booty and stuff like that, it's easy to end up focusing too much on how the camera treats her and not how the story treats her, which is that Miranda's actually a pretty decent character. And I had a good time sort of what do we call it? God damn it, the word's not coming to me at all. Redeeming her in my own eyes, playing Mass Effect 2, not only using her in the party a lot, and also looking past the camera angle bullshit and enjoying her actual storyline, but also I took her with me on the final mission and had that satisfying scene where she finally breaks the leash with the elusive man and sides with you, and like that's a character arc. I'm like, yes, that's some cool shit they did with Miranda that I didn't fully appreciate, which was partly to do with the fact that it's easy to look past certain characters in that game because there's so many of them, and it's easy to focus on other ones because that are more immediately appealing. That if there's anyone that turns you off for any particular reason, it's easy to just look past them for various reasons, and that was if she was a victim of overcrowding, perhaps. But God, that was... Man, I have to reel back to how I got there, because we're not even in the character section I wanted to talk about yet, but in the character-driven detail thing. But yeah, like there absolutely should have been a character in the party that was freaking out about the QEC topic, and that should have been a point of drama. Instead of that point of drama, we get nothing. We kind of get nothing. You see... So in Mass Effect 1, every party member was essentially a conduit into a particular section of the Mass Effect universe. You have the Asari character that will awkwardly break away from maybe my mother's dead to immediately talking about how Asari fuck. And that's like really awkward dialogue. Like, I'm not going to pretend that's not awkward dialogue. But everyone in Mass Effect 1 was a conduit into a particular subsection of the Mass Effect universe. Everyone in Mass Effect 2, instead, was generally a fully fledged character, and they were usually also mined to explore particular elements of the Mass Effect universe, but they were also given more room to float on their own as characters. The only proper Mass Effect 2 character that's in Mass Effect 1 is Garrus. Garrus is not a Mass Effect 1 character, he's a Mass Effect 2 character, because he's literally just a cop that's sick of playing by the rules. Like, Garrus does not really help you understand Turians, particularly, and he's not even that much of a big conduit into understanding the Citadel, or Citadel space, which is the other, because being CSEC, you think he might be going to that. Nope. Citadel, from the very first game, Garrus was immediately an analog for Shepard, as being the, like, the secondary shepherd, the overshadowed shepherd, or Ender's shadow, if you will. Because for those of you that don't know, there's Ender's Game, where Ender is the protagonist, and then there's Ender's Shadow, an entire secondary book that takes place over the same storyline, but it's the side character from the Ender's Game storyline, and it reveals that he was essentially being prepped as the secondary Ender if Ender failed. So, and in many ways, that's Garrus. Is that Ender succeeds in Ender's Game, but there was a secondary character that was prepped that was essentially a similar role and personality and with similar potential that was ultimately overshadowed and to sidekick the entire storyline, but was there and could have potentially risen to the occasion if something happened to Shepard. And in fact, I kind of like to think that there is some sort of alternate storyline where maybe if in like the Zelda timeline of branching storylines where Shepard fails at the end of Mass Effect 2 and Archangel is never recruited or something like that, maybe Archangel becomes the new Shepard in some way and maybe even does a better job for all we know. Like, that's the potential scene there. But aside from him, everybody else in Mass Effect 1 was just a portal into lore. But that is valid. I'm cool with that. If you want to treat your BioWare characters as portals into lore, that is also valid. And they get their own personalities along the way, and Garrus and Rex both get character-driven moments, but it's one way of handling things. You can either make them a lore character, or you can make them a fully fleshed character like all the Mass Effect 2 characters, or something in between, which some Mass Effect 2 characters are. And let's look at the Andromeda characters. I'm going to try to look at the Andromeda characters to try to compare them, because I think they largely fail. Let's see, I'm opening up a wiki to make sure I remember everybody, which is a problem already, that's the thing I'm doing, but here we go. I'm opened up the Mass Effect Andromeda characters wiki, just to make sure I remember everyone, which is alarming. Like, yeah, you can say you can say that I've replayed the other Mass Effect games multiple times, sure. So I'm like more likely to remember all the characters, and then, yeah, I get that. But also, like, there's the element of like, I played Mass Effect Andromeda for 80 hours because it's a long ass game, and you never stop having crew members with you at all times. But it's going to be interesting to see when we do the Plinkett test, as we might as well refer to it. Well, not quite, but yeah, for the record, I spent like 80 hours with Mass Effect Andromeda, whereas I would say that Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3 are about 20, 30, and 40 hours respectively, because I think each one gets about 10 hours long, in my estimation. Longer. But for those that don't know, there was a nice little test that I thought was really compelling in Plinkett's review, Red Letter Media's review of Star Wars The Phantom Menace, which is that he asks you to describe characters from a list. Describe their personality, but don't describe what they look like, and don't describe what their job is. Just describe their personality. And he asked people to describe C-3PO and Han Solo and characters like that. You know, memorable, iconic, and fascinating characters that we've built a multi-billion-dollar empire on. We did. We built it with our money, and they built it by owning it. Then he was like, now let's ask about the personality of Queen Amidala and Qui-Gon Jinn. Yeah. Good luck describing the character of Qui-Gon Jinn. Now, I'm a little biased because as a kid, or a young teenager, a young adult, I suppose, I did read the Jedi Apprentice series because when I was like 12, I thought Star Wars The Phantom Menace was the best movie ever made. That went away over time, but that did lead to me buying and reading these Jedi Apprentice novels, which are the ones where Qui-Gon is raising Obi-Wan in the Jedi Order, and then after Episode 2 came out, there was a whole other series where it's Obi-Wan raising Anakin in the Jedi Order, and like those were decent. They probably have more personality and character than most of the characters did in Phantom Menace, so those characters have been fleshed out for me in a way that the movies never did, but that was a thing. But yeah, I also did the test on multiple people in real life, because I watched it with multiple people, and they would watch they'd watch the review and hit that part, and the first thing they would say is, hang on a minute, Queen Amidala, she's young and naive. And I'm like, those aren't character traits that are actually exerted in the film. You're literally quoting Sidious. Sidious says, Queen Amidala is young and naive. And the first thing people do when they explain the personality of Queen Amidala is literally quote what the villain said about her. And I'm like, that's a problem. That's a problem if all you can think of is what the villain said about her, which isn't even entirely true, because like if she's so naive, why does she have a body double? And like, why is she like trying to go to the Senate? And like, there's all these like sure, like she's wrong about some stuff, but like she actually has multiple things she does that are like the opposite of naivete. But okay, sure, let's just quote the villain, because that's good writing, is just to say what the character's personality is to the audience instead of showing it. That's my favorite part about Han Solo is when we read the codex entry that explains what his personality is. So we're not going to do exactly that, but I'm going to instead apply more of a test in terms of what I value in an RPG. Like, I want interesting, memorable characters, and in order for them to play off each other well and be compelling, they need flaws. They have to have problems, and not just adversity problems, as in like, oh no, the bad guy wants us dead, that's a problem, but like deep-seated issues in their personality or their past and the decisions that they have made that bring them to where they are. Because that's what makes them compelling characters, and basically every compelling major fictional character we've ever cared about, ever, usually applies on some level to succeeding. That did not have a sentence plan there at all. It just kind of turned into words. But pretty much every major fictional character that has a memorable personality and we cherish has some elements of this somewhere. Even a lot of the bad ones usually get this much right. And if you don't have those kinds of problems, you get into an element of writing that is unfortunate because it goes into the original character do not steal Mary Sue territory, where, for those who don't know, Mary Sue, or at least my understanding of it, that I'm going to throw out here without researching it again, because that's apparently how I do this, people will write stories where they have a self-insert character. It's an ongoing fan fiction problem in particular, is people will write their Sonic the Hedgehog fan fiction or their Star Wars fan fiction and so on, and they'll make up a character. And that made-up character is usually a form of wish fulfillment and self-insertion, where it's essentially them. And they care so much about that character, and that they don't want to hurt the image of that character. They don't want to make their character look bad. So the character ends up having no flaws and 100 different powers. And if you're really like a Mass Effect Mary Sue of the worst, most zero self-awareness kind, might be like a half Asari that has the L4 implants and loves everybody and like likes and dislikes, like likes sushi and video games and dislikes mean people and ignorance, because fucking I hate it when people make up their characters that have a likes and dislikes meter. Like, wow, you dislike intolerant people? Wow, me too. What a compelling character. Fuck. People make terrible characters when they get the chance to make characters that they make to represent themselves. And if you care about a character too much and you're too close to them, you make a character that's too perfect. And all of their flaws are not really flaws. They're just flaws that make them cooler and more edgy or more fitting to your particular likes. Like how like somebody might like have their character be a badass guy with a trench coat and he's a loner because he's a lone wolf, and it's like, but it's like all of his negative traits are basically positive traits that just some people might call negative, but it's really just like more things that make you think they're cooler. And Drac suffers from some of that, because Drac is like, I'm an old Krogan, and look at all these cybernetic parts. I've been torn apart and put back together so many times because I'm so badass, and like that kind of thing. And it's like that on its own could be a good storyline, and it could be a trait of a character that has other interesting traits, but just having that, like scars and wounds and stuff like that, doesn't count as a flaw. It counts as just a detail that made your character seem cool. It's not a personality problem. So what I'm going to do, let's bring this up really quick. I'm going to try to compare Mass Effect Andromeda characters to Mass Effect 2 characters, as an example, for the purposes of this test, because that'll be fun. So let's just go in the order that's listed on the page, I suppose. Cora Harper, which, man, this one's a hard one, because I forgot she existed for a large chunk of the playthrough. I would periodically talk to her, because I'd engage in the Mass Effect loop and BioWare loop of like, hey, you're between missions, you should go talk to all your party members to see if like storylines happen, and it might make some good like reveals about how they work. So Cora Harper already has some Mary Sue warning flags pop up immediately, which is that she is a human biotic that was raised with the Asari Huntresses, and or not raised with, but trained with the Asari Huntresses. So you got this already thing like this, basically what's going on right now with a Star Trek Discovery is the protagonist of the entire series is a human that was trained with the Vulcans, and you're like, oh great, so we're gonna have a human walk around dressed like a Vulcan a bit, but then also be torn between being Vulcan and human, and mostly they're mostly just wasting it because so far she's just a human, and her being Vulcan seems incredibly irrelevant past the first episode basically. But Cora, I guess, her point is that she's part Asari, not biologically, but like that's part of her training as a person. Guess how important that is to the story? Not particularly. Her loyalty mission is that you eventually go after the Asari Ark, and you encounter somebody that she idolized, and you find out that person wasn't ultimately. That person might have not been fully worth idolizing. Because they betray their own superior officer, and that is a compelling plot point. But Cora as a character, like that's not really a flaw for her. It's a wrinkle. It's a development in her plot line. But she as a character, being a Asari trained character, isn't really a flaw, and it doesn't really manifest itself really much at all. Partly because the concept of an Asari Huntress is like a background detail that has existed in the Mass Effect universe, but we don't really have a super strong idea of what that would mean for an individual, necessarily. It's not like the Asari are Vulcans or Klingons, where they have a really specific behavior pattern. The Asari are actually kind of like these chill, human, non-gendered creatures, and they're badass, sure, but you see the problem here? It's like saying that, like, it's almost like this element of like saying your character is Neo. It's like, wow, look, they can see the code. Congrats. Like they have special training. Okay. That's not interesting. Like it's interesting it's interesting on an individual detail, like, huh. But then that's all she has. Her entire character is that she is a human biotic that trained with the Asari. And her personality is that she's kind of strict or stern sometimes. Seems to be kind of how she behaves. She's like ever so slightly but inoffensively abrasive. Like not in an interesting way, not in a Jack way, not in an Ashley way. Like Cora's not going to offend people. Like Ashley, people still get mad that she's racist, even though like she's really not racist. She just doesn't trust aliens not as a God, I hate... I guess we can talk about that, though. Fuck it, yeah. Instead of comparing Cora against a Mass Effect 2 character, let's compare her with a Mass Effect 1 character, then. Let's compare Cora with Ashley, the two female crew members that are human in Mass Effect Andromeda and Mass Effect 1. This should be the fairest comparison ever, right? Because they're both starting level characters. They're both beginning of a trilogy, so should be equally fair, as opposed to Mass Effect 2, which cheated by having the ability to just be fully fleshed characters from the get-go. So, Ashley Jenkins... Wait, I'm sorry. Who the fuck is Ashley Jenkins? Ashley Jenkins... Because this is going to bother me, so I'm just going to Google this shit. Oh, Ashley Jenkins is from Rooster Teeth. Okay, that's where I got that. Ashley Williams, which... is an obvious reference to Ash Williams from Evil Dead in her name, but that's not really important. It's just a throwaway detail. She is a human soldier. She is doomed to be the most boring character in any Mass Effect game ever. And yet, she actually beats several Mass Effect characters. She beats Kaidan. She beats Jacob. She beats Cora. She beats Liam. She beats basically every other human character besides like Miranda and Jack, pretty much. And people have varying responses to being called Lola. So I'm just gonna not touch on how people don't agree on how to treat the Mass Effect 3 human crew member, and I'm still undecided sometimes, but fine. So Ashley is interesting because she voices racist rhetoric at moments in the first game, but is specifically and nuancedly not racist. Instead, the issue with Ashley is that she doesn't trust aliens as an organization. Like, she doesn't have a problem going on a mission with a Turian, for example, or a Krogan, which is what happens throughout the game. Her problem is she doesn't trust Turians or like Citadel races. She doesn't trust the Council. She doesn't trust the Turian military. She doesn't trust the organizations themselves. And as she elegantly puts it at one point in a thing that I will butcher via paraphrasing and not remember correctly, she talks about, like, if you're being attacked by a bear and you have your dog, your hunting dog, like, you love your dog, but you're gonna let the bear get the dog as opposed to you, or maybe your family, or so on. Like, and you can agree or disagree with what Ashley is saying there about how much you should fight for the protection of the dog at your own risk, and that is a spectrum of different people. But you can't say that she's totally unreasonable there. Like, the bear poses a lethal threat to you. The dog is not you, and is not one of your family members, and it's not one of you. So a lot of people would probably be willing to sacrifice the dog in order to survive a bear attack. And they'd feel bad about it, and it's bad, but it can happen. And so that's Ashley's analysis of how race relations work in the Mass Effect universe. Is like, we can get along with Turians, we can get along with Asari, but when something bad happens, when something truly horrible happens, and you have to choose, they'll sacrifice the dog. And in this case, the humanity is the dog. Because humans are not Turians, they're not Asari. And it's some of it comes down to race and trust, and some of it just comes down to incentive structures. If you're the leader of the Asari, your job is to protect the Asari. That's your job. It's hard to come up with incentive to reach out and defend other groups over your own. And in fact, and the story proves Ashley right, because in Mass Effect 3, the entire story is how everybody sacrificed the dog. Every single organization in all of Mass Effect 3 sacrifices the dog during the Reaper invasion, in that all of them retreat to their individual areas and just deal with their problems and say to hell with everybody else. And the entire point of Mass Effect 3 is Shepard essentially resolving various problems to specifically get everyone to do that, to come together at long last and to have the only chance possible of like going with the Crucible and saving the universe from, well, the galaxy from the Reapers. Like, that's important. But nonetheless, like, you can tell from the way that people reacted to Ashley, like, it still is seen as a character flaw. People are definitely bothered by the fact that Ashley says what she does, because, and I think it's part of it is because we have the advantage of not being members of the Mass Effect universe, so we don't have to think about the stakes and what will happen to us as humanity because we're not in it. And so when you're not putting yourself in those shoes, you look at humanity first or Ashley, and you see them as being a huge problem. And as things progress and expand, you can fully realize over time where the divergence between humanity first and Ashley, and where, like, how the humanity first people are going off the deep end, where Ashley actually has a more nuanced opinion that is realistic about her situation and what will happen ultimately in the storyline. But it's clearly a thing that bothers people, and they were willing, like, they knew that. they knew when they wrote Ashley what their rhetoric sounds like. That is what people say when they are actually racist. And she walks it back and she contextualizes it in great ways that make sense. And I think ultimately it does mean something different than just like Ashley's a bigot and it's that simple, which I was disappointed to see in the comments. A lot of people do think it's that simple, that Ashley is just bigoted and that's it. And that's the only reason for her behavior. And I'm like, no, did you miss everything? But okay. In addition to this, Ashley has to deal with the fact that her father or grandfather, is a greatly dishonored character. They were seen, if I remember correctly, didn't they? I think they surrendered. I think they either surrendered to the Turians or in some way lost in a major way, and so they were seen as this dishonorable failure within the military. And Ashley carries that name and that insecurity. And you can look at that and see why she's so gung-ho to throw herself into danger and go into these into all these crazy scenarios and risk herself and ultimately risk dying in Vermeer. She will, just like Caden, she is willing to sacrifice herself to make sure that bomb goes off. And her earlier character development explains that because of the specific history that her family has and this redemption mission that she sees herself as shouldering. Like, that's character development that motivates her behaviors. Cora is an Ambien pill in human form. Like, she is a relentlessly boring person with almost no flaws or character traits. She's kind of stern. She likes the Asari. And at most, the most interesting thing you can get out of her is that you can make jokes about how she's essentially the equivalent of a Asari weeaboo, in that she is like Americans that obsess over Japanese culture. She feels like that for a human obsessing over Asari culture a little bit, but she doesn't really do it in any kind of endearing way. She's not like constantly sharing Asari trivia with you at every corner, and she doesn't seem particularly infatuated by it. It's just a part of her history that she's relatively tight-lipped about, and they kind of don't go anywhere else with her throughout the game. Like, I have to go through and read her, and part of the reason why I have so little to say about her, even though the fact that she has a bunch of conversations with you on the ship, is because that these traits are not reinforced. Like, you remember that Ashley has a bunch of different conversations with you, but some of them are harder to remember. Like, it's harder to remember when she tells you a story about her sister punching that dude out or whatever, because it doesn't come up later. So I, like, to the point where in the more recent playthrough of it, when I encountered that story, I didn't remember it. And I was like, have I ever encountered this dialogue before? I don't remember. Because I didn't remember it. But like the issue of her family name, that is reinforced by a plot point within the same game. So it gets reinforced and you remember it. None of Cora's personality traits or histories come up again at any point in the game except for connection with the Asari, which only comes up during the Asari arc mission, which just boils down to hero worship being betrayed, and that's it. And while that's an interesting plot point, it's not enough to carry an entire character and make them memorable or interesting. And to the point where, like, if Cora died in the game, I don't know how many people would feel that much of a gut punch compared to, like, half the other faceless people that aren't even in your party member that could die. And in fact, there's at least one or two crew members that could die that people would care more about, I think. Mainly Callow, who is probably better written than most of the crew members, which is a problem because they're crew members in a BioWare game, and I don't know how that happened. Like, I'm reading her wiki page now, and it says her screening interviews state that she was raised in poverty on an independent cargo freighter. She joined the Alliance at 18 and obtained training for her powerful biotic abilities. I'm like, okay, she was raised in poverty? I'll accept that she probably told me that at some point. I won't claim foul play, but who cares? Like, where does that come up in the story? Like, what is that? Where is that reinforced? Because I want to point out, these characters had more time to breathe than any character in any Mass Effect game ever. and in many and more so than many BioWare games. Every Mass Effect game, but many BioWare games. The only character that can compete with how much screen time and exposure and time that the developers had where they could have expanded these characters. The only real competition is Tali, Liara, and Garrus because they're in a whole trilogy, but Liara's not in a whole trilogy. And Tali's only in the second half of every game because that's a weird character trait of hers as she gets recruited last every time, apparently. But Garrus has tons of breathing room, so obviously he gets a free pass on they had so much time to develop him that, like, of course he's developed as a character. But Cora, she's your first crew member, second crew member after Liam. You technically get Liam 10 minutes sooner, let's be fair. But you get her for 80 hours of game. And yeah, you filter her in and out of the party if you're here and there, but they just don't get much character, necessarily. The most that she gets is that she gets in disagreements with other characters, but that's not enough for me. Like, I will agree that the characters, you get closer to them and you start caring about them more when you drive around in your not Mako, I forgot what it's called now, but the land vehicle, because this game has the thing where party members talk to each other. So your party members will talk to each other in the land vehicle while you're going on these long commutes to all of your jobs, because that's what the game feels like at some point. And yeah, you will have lively dialogue between these characters, and I appreciated that lively dialogue. I did. But that lively dialogue is skin deep. It's banter, and it is not enough to fully suffice as character development. Like, sure, I get a kick out of it when Morrigan and Leliana talk about shoes. That is some funny dialogue that comes up in Mass Effect and in Dragon Age Origins and stuff like that. But those moments are generally not major character beats for those characters. It is just banter. So while I appreciate that the banter is well done in Mass Effect Andromeda, and continuing the legacy of the franchise of having good banter between characters, and in fact, at times, there's even specific moments that are some of the best banter ever developed in Mass Effect games or BioWare games. It is up there. It's one of the things that's done right. Probably because all that had to happen is some people in a complete vacuum, separate from all of the rest of game development, just had to write fun conversations between characters and then voice them. And then and then they don't even have to put them anywhere in the game, which is probably why it's one of the better parts of the game. Is it just randomly plays when you're having when you're driving around. Which is a bummer because it gets cut off by other dialogue that sucks. Like Sam being like, "Oh, scan this point, Ryder." I'm like, you lost Sam, you fuck. You just overrode that conversation for the rest of the game and I'm never going to get it. I'm going to have to look up a YouTube video that's like every conversation between Drac and Cora, which, come to think of it, I'm probably going to do after this because I want to go through and do one of those where it's every single possible conversation because those are the good parts. But while I enjoy that stuff, and I can understand why it's good in Andromeda because of how easy it is to implement compared to many other pieces of content, it is not character development. It is only texture. It is not beats. It is not proper shapes. It is not the polygon that makes up the character's personality. It is the color of the wallpaper on it, and its little scrapes here and there. It's not enough. And Cora never gets more, to the point where she basically deletes herself from the game midway through, because I found that getting the Asari arc was one of the easiest and earliest things you could do out of all the loyalty missions. And once I did that loyalty mission, which must have been halfway through my playthrough, I basically never encounter Cora for the rest of the game in many ways. Like, I could sub her into the party here and there and she'd have some banter here and there, but like, she has no more beats or character developments, or things to go on for what might have been another 30 hours. The game just forgets about her, and at most she'll show up in ensemble scenes where, like, everybody's getting together for movie night, or everybody's revving up for the final mission. Then she'll be among the cast, and she'll say one thing, probably. But, like, she never gets character development, she never gets beats, she's just flat and boring. And she's more flat and boring than even characters like Kaidan and Jacob ever were. And that sucks. And yes, in particular, I think Jacob fails the test I'm talking about here, in that Jacob has, like, no flaws. Jacob's big flaw is that he joined Cerberus. He is an honorable man, and he will defend people, and he wants what's right for the galaxy, and he thought that maybe Cerberus would do that. and whoops, he disagrees with that. He regrets that decision, but that's like all he does, and it's so boring, and that's why people don't care about Jacob, because he doesn't have anywhere to go. So I would say Cora versus Ashley. Ashley wins as being like a properly developed, interesting character with controversial viewpoints and development from game to game. We can get she's not the strongest example, and I'm going to be getting into some of the stronger examples in the follow-up examples, but I figured she came up in conversation, so I just went with it. She's not as interesting as Miranda ultimately is, I don't think, but we have plenty of better examples to get to. So let's talk about Liam Costa, which I'm going to have to open his wiki page to see if I can remind myself of anything interesting, because Liam is like even worse than Cora at being the most boring, like morphine drip of a character ever. Liam's primary helpful traits for being interesting, or not even interesting, but just entertaining, is that he is a lively, reckless character, and he'll say funny things here and there. And so that breathes through and makes him more entertaining at times. And it really, really comes through when you get to his loyalty mission, which is one of the best done parts of the entire game, to the point where it's staggering and confusing. Because this entire game is some very like MMORPG content stuff where everyone's stiff and static and standing still and just jabbermouthing at you by having machine dialogue animations on their face while they say really boring dialogue that involves doing a fetch quest and stuff, and you're walking around an open world. So it was a massive shock to play Liam's loyalty mission and encounter this like high production value thing full of like comedic timing and good writing, and also like for the first and last time in the game, level design that complements the mobility that they added to your character in Mass Effect Andromeda, because like all that jumping and dashing suddenly made sense because you were playing on a cargo ship of some kind that was like inverting its gravity because its gravity stabilizers were going out of whack. So like suddenly it's like now the gravity's on the ceiling, now the gravity's on the wall, and that's not built to be walked on. So like the ability to jump up and down walls and like on and deal with verticality was suddenly being properly respected. This is off topic, but I'm dwelling on it now. Apparently, this and suddenly the level design matched the game design, which was baffling because it never really had so far. But also, like, there's all these playful moments of like you're having your Firefly scenario essentially, where like it's a life and death mission, but people are being tongue in cheek and silly about it, and a bunch of funny things keep happening, just like with how Mal reacts in Firefly, where like he'll be like wearing a bonnet and pretending to be a woman on a stagecoach and saying some of the funniest shit while threatening people with guns. And like that's the aesthetic and tone of stuff like Guardians of the Galaxy and Firefly that a lot of people enjoy. And suddenly Liam's loyalty mission just goes full bore into that, and it nails it at every turn, and it's funny as shit. And I found myself wishing that an entire game by BioWare would be done in this tone, because it's more enjoyable than whatever the hell Andromeda was. And so they were able to mine Liam's tone effectively, in that's how he behaves. And so that was nice. But when we talk about his character, that's when it gets a lot harder to have a conversation, like a lot harder. So he was an engineering student, and he joined. He essentially joined like volunteer crisis response organizations back on Earth, like, or not necessarily Earth, but Milky Way. I don't remember if he was on Earth specifically, but so he was a crisis response dude. So he helps people in times of crisis. It's really straightforward. It's not much to go on there, but like it means he cares about people and he's willing to risk himself in order to save other people and help people in times of need. And he's a big old like lawful good paladin awesome person. Like Liam's a great person. Good job. And every now and then he'll do something slightly reckless and take things into his own hands and so on, and there's little moments of color here and there. But being a likable person and being a good person isn't the same thing as being a good character. And Liam, once again, he just like lacks flaws. There's really just nothing going on, really. The worst thing he ever does in all of Mass Effect is in all of Andromeda is that in his loyalty mission he takes on a mission without consulting with you, basically, and like he did something brash and reckless, and that he jumped into it without fully like informing you of all the details and making sure that you're game for it, which is actually a thing that happens a few times with a few different characters, but it happens with him, and that's his major story beat. That's his major flaw, is that like he didn't do the paperwork correctly and like didn't properly go through the motions of clearing this with you, and like that's not a compelling reason. That's not a compelling flaw, really. He's just a little brash, and that's it. There's just nowhere to go with that. And he's a primary crew member in a game that only has 6 crew members or 6 party members, which is already really low for a BioWare game, where they usually have equal or more than that. And Mass Effect games, aside from the first one, had significantly more than that, and so on throughout the franchise and their other games. Like, it's normal to have more party members than this, and now we're 2 party members deep, and they're both humans that help people, and one of them slightly stern, and one of them slightly playful and reckless. Like, the only way to even distinguish them as characters is to use them as foils against each other. Because when you compare them to each other, you're like, oh, that's the stern one, and that's the playful one, because they're foils for each other. But that's like their only character trait. Meanwhile, let's pick somebody from Mass Effect 2. Any of these characters pretty much work, honestly. But let's talk about Jack, which people are, once again, is a character that people have varying responses to. But Jack was a prisoner when you find her. You break her out of what's essentially like Chronicles of Riddick jail. Like she's basically in Riddick jail, where she's probably in the cell right next to Vin Diesel. She's covered in tattoos, and she hates everybody. And she is actively abrasive to every character, including you. When you set her free, she goes on a murderous rampage throughout the entire facility, separate from you. She's not like a reckless member of your party. She's not even in your party yet. She's just wiping out everybody she can and being this wrecking ball through society. And that was likely why she was in jail in the first place. And when she does join your crew, she doesn't get along with anybody. She puts herself in the basement area, essentially, and she even actively tells you to fuck off when you come down there to talk to her. But if you dig enough, you eventually can find out how she works. And one of the best parts about Mass Effect 2, by the way, is the fact that you have this ongoing thing with the loyalty mission. Every character has a loyalty mission, and it's for a reason. Like, they did the equivalence of loyalty missions once or twice in Mass Effect 1 just by happenstance, and they did it in Mass Effect Andromeda seemingly out of obligation to just keep up that trend, even though there's no stakes. But in Mass Effect 2, the game's going to end with a suicide mission, and you need to everyone clear-headed and undistracted and uncompromised in a variety of different ways, and you need to get them refocused. And you need them prepped for the suicide mission, or they will likely die. And if you go into the suicide mission at the end of Mass Effect 2 without doing anyone's loyalty missions, there will be a body count, and it will be a mess. And you will permanently lose various interesting characters. But Jack's loyalty mission is that she tracks down the place that she grew up in, which is, you find out, was this biotic facility where they experimented on children. Cerberus was experimenting on children to make them these super powerful biotics. And so, yeah, this is a relatively edgy origin story, but it actually, I think it does largely work. So she is a result of biotic experiments from an unethical company. And what becomes interesting is, like, you knew that stuff from the get-go, more or less. But what you learn when you're in that facility is something that contradicts her own worldview about what her life is. Because for her, Nobody's ever helped her. Nobody's ever done anything for her. Everyone has always been out to get her and use her and exploit her. And so she's been going across space being this reckless, hard bitch that will not deal with anybody. And she's out on her own, and she'll kill without a thought. And she'll steal, and she'll fuck, and she'll just do whatever benefits her at any given moment. And that's more or less how she deals with things, which already is more interesting than pretty much anyone in Mass Effect Andromeda, because first, she's just a shitty person. Like, she is just a shitty person by and large in Mass Effect 2, and that makes her more interesting already. But what she finds out is that her memories of her childhood are all wrong in various ways. She thought that she was singled out and mistreated and exploited, and you can't blame her for this stuff. Her memories of the past, because she was a child and she was traumatic and it's horrible. But what gets extra horrible is learning that she was wrong about these things, because you start finding out that she was the golden child. She was the golden goose. She was the one that was up on a pedestal. She was the only child in this child experimentation nightmare facility that was treated as non-disposable. She was not expendable. She was the actual important central figure of this entire thing, and all the other children were expendable, so they all got worse treatment. All the other, like, first of all, many children, I believe, what the detail was that many of them just suffocated in the shipping crates, because like when they would ship them there, they wouldn't even like take care to make sure they would even survive the trip, first of all. But all the experiments that made Jack more powerful, they were conducted on the other kids first to see if they were safe and effective. And so they were permanently disfiguring and scarring and killing and traumatizing all of these other children with all these experiments so that they could use them on Jack once they were proven and tested, so that she could become what she eventually became, as this biotic badass, because that's the type of bullshit that Cerberus does, because they're a horrible, horrible company. And they're horrible. Everything about them is terrible, which is why and unfortunately, by the end of Mass Effect 3, they become this unbelievable, impossible organization, as opposed to just being an evil one, which was a bummer, but fine. And so Jack, as you're going through this facility, this run-down, abandoned facility full of like wild animals and remnants and so on, because it's not actively manned anymore, you're going through these audio logs and these memories, and then eventually you even encounter a person that was another child that was abducted by Cerberus and experimented on, and between these audio logs and documents and videos and the other person you meet, you learn the truth of Jack's past, which is that it's still traumatic and horrible, but also her powers were bought with the souls of many other dead and disfigured and traumatized children that never get to have normal lives, so that they can make her that good. And she didn't know any of this when she was going in. She didn't understand this. And this is a whole new fucked up focus. And like that is like you took an already interesting and textured character and you completely did a twist on her entire premise within the same game. And like there's so many beats here, and like this is fantastic. And yeah, people will talk in and out about like Jack's wardrobe and her behavior and whether she's Edgelord 9000 with her goddamn origin story and everything like that, but like that compared to Cora, compared to Liam, look how much there was in one game. A game that was like 50% or 30% as long as Andromeda was. Look how much Jack got. A character that was one of like 10 or 12 characters. Let's count them right now, because I'm looking at them right now. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 9. Yeah. Wait, what? 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Is that 13 characters? Was that 13 characters? That doesn't sound right. Oh, well, yeah. It looks like I'm looking at a cast of 13 characters. So if there was 13 squad members in Mass Effect 2. Oh, right, it's 13. Right, the total in my head is 12, but Samara and Morinth fill the same slot, and that's why there's 13. Right. So if Mass Effect 12 could flesh out... If Mass Effect 2 could flesh out 13 characters, why can't Andromeda flesh out 6? What's their excuse? They had like twice as much game, and that's a problem because this is a problem because not only is it bad for storytelling to have weak characters, but one of my primary draws from the very beginning, because the first BioWare game I played was KOTOR, Knights of the Old Republic on the Xbox, and talking to my crew members, like, I looked forward to that. Every time you did a main story mission, you finished a main planet, you would then go back to your ship, and all your crew members were in their various rooms, and you could have a one-on-one conversation with each one and learn more about their backstory. And it was very mechanical how they would always have more for you every time you finished a main story mission and stuff like that. And like, it was very predictable, but it was cool. Like, either way, I looked forward to that ritual, and it was a ritual that I replicated when I got to Mass Effect 1, where every time I finished a main story mission, you do the tour around the Normandy. Even though it has that goddamn cargo elevator, you always do that tour where you talk to a different character, and you learn more about every single one of them every time you finish a main story mission, and that kept adding more texture and interesting details to them. And you don't get that here so much, especially with Liam and Cora. The most you get is Liam will share a story about how, like, because he's sentimental. So because he's sentimental, Liam and his family did. God, the details are lost on me because of how boring they are. But like, they secretly brought a car with them, I believe. It was either on the Andromeda mission or they shot it into space somewhere. But like, they had some sentimental gesture that involved an old beat-up car he used to work on with his dad or something like that, and they brought it with them, I think, on the Andromeda initiative, so that they could bring it to Andromeda and shoot it into space or something like that. I don't know. I could be making up the shooting it into space part. But, like, all you get is a sentimental story. Like, you might get a story about the hardships of working as a relief worker, and you might get a sentimental story about a car he used to work on with his dad. And that's like it. And like, a sentimental story, unless you're gonna have the really specific payoff, like a weirdly specific payoff of like this, of the car having a pivotal moment later in the story, which it doesn't. It's never mentioned or seen again. In fact, it's never seen, I believe. Unless it comes up later, it's just kind of texture, but not a proper character beat that's relevant to the story, which is a problem when you compare it to like someone like Rex, for example. And it's because there's so many more Mass Effect characters, it's tempting to mention multiple of them every time I get to one of these characters. But fuck it, yeah, let's get through Rex right now in comparison to Liam, even though I already compared him to Jack. Fuck it. Rex, just in Mass Effect 1 alone, in just Mass Effect 1, by the way, I'm saying Jack beats Liam, but fuck it. When you want to talk about character traits you get over time coming up later in the story, in just Mass Effect 1 alone, Rex starts off being this detached, apathetic mercenary. That's the front he puts on in Mass Effect 1, is that he's a Krogan. Krogan are generally, much like the Mandalorians, they're mercenaries, they're warlike, and they just go out and do odd jobs for money, and they're willing to get their hands dirty and kill people if that's what's necessary, and they don't really care, and that's fine. That's what they do. And then then he starts talking more and more like there's a specific triggering moment with Rex where you talk about the Salarians and you stumble into an accidental situation in what is the most awkward conversation ever, where you accidentally mention you stumble into the genophage topic, and you're like, and I don't remember the exact context of what you say exactly, where you're like, oh, whatever that thing's like, what we had was just as bad or whatever. Like, I think you might be talking about first contact with the, you might be talking about first contact with the Turians, or you might be talking about the Rachni or something like that. Just some kind of conflict. And then his response like, oh yeah, is your problem causing the death of your entire race? And out of every 1,000 stillborns, one person gets born. And like, he goes on this tirade where his entire facade of being this detached mercenary completely collapses, and he just fucking bombs you from orbit. Like, he says the most devastating shit and opens the floodgates to all the horrible things about the genophage and the Krogan, and you are not ready for it when you're going into the game blind, that this is just gonna fucking happen all of a sudden from Rex, that he's just gonna go here all of a sudden, and it's gonna get really dramatic really fast. And that recontextualizes Rex. In one dialogue moment, everything changes for Rex, for how you see him as a character. And it's not for naught. Not only is it a major plot development for Rex himself, but it's also a major lore development about how the genophage works and how the Krogans work, and it recontextualizes not only the councils but especially the Asari. I mean not only the council races but especially the Solarians, and how they are willing to deal with these kinds of problems, the Krogans and so on. And it gives texture to like later encounters with the Rachni, and also one of the climaxes of the story, Vermeer, is about dealing with the genophage. There is a Krogan scientist that is working with Sovereign and Saren to create this version of Krogans that can mate again, and they can break past the genophage, but they're also indoctrinated and they're slaves. And that's important because that means that major dialogue that happened that developed the universe and also Rex's character also is set up for one of the climaxes of the game. So like on top of being, and this is why Vermeer is so memorable and so impactful, is that in many ways Vermeer is a character climax for various members of the party. And like it makes sense, for example, for Ashley to die there, because Ashley dying in Vermeer is this moment of catharsis and redemption for her family line, where previously she had a family member that failed in this kind of scenario and her name was shamed for it. That's her redemption moment. And also here Rex can also die on this planet, because when he finds out that the Krogan have a chance at coming back, that changes everything for him. Because before, he was detached, but it was kind of a front in that he secretly does really care about the Krogans and doesn't actually have this apathetic feeling. Because you realize his apathy isn't an automatic sense of apathy, but it's earned. You realize that he feels that way about the Krogan because he has tried. He's tried so hard to unite the Krogan and save the Krogan as a race, but he's failed. For decades, even. He's been shut down every turn, and he has given up on the Krogan. He thinks that all options are exhausted, and the Krogan are going to die, and there's nothing you can do to save them. But Vermeer happens, and you have a way to save the Krogan. And it's fucked up, and it makes them slaves, and it's horrible. But he's tempted by it, much like how Garrus is constantly tempted but to go into these dark territories throughout the series. Like, Rex hears that there's a way to save the Krogan, and then he hears that your plan is to blow it up. And he responds how his character should to that scenario, which is that he responds by pointing a gun at you and threatening to kill you, and you have this tense fucking showdown with Ashley and Rex and Shepard, because he sees this as the one last glimmering hope that he thought was gone. And your challenge at that point is to do the impossible, which is not that impossible because you just have to max out Charm or Intimidate or do a side quest earlier in the game to earn his trust. But it's impossible in that Shepard is a hero, and he is better than normal people and does impossible things. So when he does the Charm, Intimidate solution that makes Rex that talks Rex down, or talks Saren into shooting himself later in the game, that's not because you're not supposed to interpret those moments as being like, oh wow, it was that easy. You're supposed to think that's only possible because of how exceptional Shepard is and how far they've come in their development that they could pull that off. It's supposed to be hard, and that's the point. And you have this impossible task of dealing with this Krogan patriarch, essentially, which patriarch's not a thing in their society, but that he is a patriarchal figure and that he is this major, important, influential character for their race, and he has given up on them. And he gets his last hope, and he wants to grasp onto that, and he's willing to betray his own team to do so. In one of the best betrayal moments of any BioWare game, really, is this moment with Rex, where he has a very real reason to do this. And he doesn't, like, he's going to kill you. He can't. So when the moment comes where he's planning on actually killing you, what happens actually is Ashley kills Rex, and you lose Rex, and Ashley kills him. And by the way, that also this feeds back into the Ashley conversation about how Ashley is somebody who believes that while she's willing to work with aliens, and she isn't necessarily actively racist against the individual aliens and everything, she does think that when it comes down to the fate of entire entire planets or races, the aliens will look after their own first. And this comes up here, where she's proven right, because Rex is about to shoot you for the sake of the Krogan race, despite your allegiances, and it's exactly what Ashley thought would happen, and she's right. Just in case we missed that particular plot detail. And so you have to talk him down, and you have to convince him that this is not the way to save the Krogans, and that even if something that is technically biologically Krogan survives this, they won't be Krogans, because there will be these slaves to Saren and Sovereign, and that this is the wrong way to do it. And you can make him see the light and convince him. And this is not a throwaway thing. Not only was this set up before with the earlier interactions with Rex and the universe, and to make it a powerful plot point, but it's also a character moment for Rex because it changes him as a person. It's character development, and this is important, is that Rex changes course again. This moment, despite the failure that it is, despite that you do blow up this cure for the Krogans, it revitalizes Rex's hope that something can be made of the Krogan race, and that they can be salvaged, and that he doesn't need to just give in to nihilism and betrayal, which fucking... Let's just remind ourselves that the first character you meet that dies in this game is named Nihilus, but okay. No big deal, just lots of fun little parallels there. Turns out that the Krogan maybe can be saved. So in the next game, instead of being just another automatic obligatory party member, like many people are, Rex is not a party member in the next game. He has returned to Tuchanka to lead the Krogan, and he is making progress, and strides are being made. And then in Mass Effect 3, Rex returns once again, if he's still alive, to have his entire plot point be about at long last being able to defeat the Genophage, hopefully, unless you shoot more than you monster, you nightmare monster, or the various other bad things you can do along the way. Like that. This is good storytelling. By the way, can you tell that Mass Effect is my favorite game ever made? Because I talk about this like, oh man. Fuck. Doing this podcast about Mass Effect Andromeda is making me like Mass Effect even more. Like that. I knew that stuff about... There was things I just said that I knew about Rex and that I knew about Ashley. But analyzing them and then also contrasting them against the plot points of Mass Effect 1 are making me like Mass Effect 1 even more, and realizing not only parallels and story beats that I didn't realize before. Like, I understood what happened in Mass Effect 1, but there's clever shit going on with Ashley and Rex and Vermeer that I didn't fully realize till I started talking about it today. And I've been playing this game for 10 years. This is good writing. This is one of the best RPGs of all time. And I'm not even talking about Noveria, the planet I actually like the most. But apparently Vermeer might be a close contender in ways that I didn't entirely realize before, because the idea that it's the fucking character climax for two different characters is so fucking good. And it is not Mass Effect 1's fault that later games kind of fucked up Ashley, because later games should have treated Ashley better. And she should have gotten the same kind of development that Rex did. And that is not Mass Effect 1's fault. And man, Mass Effect 1, fuck, you're good. God damn it. Where are those moments for Liam and Cora? Huh? I just want to point out that all the idiot fucking Andromeda fanboys that I've had to deal with for the last, like, half a year, you guys, your go-to explanation, and I've ended up subverting it. You guys always say that Mass Effect 2 and 3, that's where the good characters were. Mass Effect 1 is when all the bad characters were there. Everyone was just a lore explanation and had no character, so it's unfair to compare Andromeda with the Mass Effect trilogy, because obviously the characters in Andromeda just aren't ready yet. They're here to be the step one lore dump of the beginning of the franchise, and then you gotta get a whole trilogy to get good writing for some reason, just ignoring the fact that it's an 80-hour game and they have way more time than Mass Effect 1 ever did, and ignoring the fact that they aren't even lore dumps because it's an established universe and they aren't even really a conduit into it aside from Jal. Ignoring all those other things, looks like I discovered amazing character arcs in Mass Effect 1 that are not only good characters in their own right, but also built into the narrative of the actual arc of the game, almost like it's an elegantly, carefully put together storyline and one of the best stories written in the history of video games. Funny that. Man, that was not in my notes. That wasn't in my notes. I was just going to compare the characters one by one with each other just to show how they suck. But I ended up disproving the go-to argument people make, where Mass Effect 1 has shitty characters, so it's okay for Andromeda to have shitty characters. No, you're wrong. You're wrong in ways I didn't fully realize until I started talking about them, but holy shit, they nailed it in Mass Effect 1, and it was their first entry into the entire franchise. That game, despite being the shortest Mass Effect game ever, had to set up the entire Mass Effect universe and did the most legwork that any of the games ever did, and it also got the characters right, and the story beats right, and it integrated the story beats for the characters into the main story, because it's fucking Vermeer. And it's kind of a big deal. Maybe you've heard of it. Oh, that was fun. And obviously this is part 2 of not 2, it would turn out. Because I didn't even get through the characters. I only talked about 2 Andromeda characters. I gotta get through the other ones because we keep talking about other stuff. And that's fine. I'm having a blast. I don't know if you could tell, but I'm having a goddamn blast with this, and this one was even longer. I intentionally made it go a little longer because I had that rant about RPGs that some people might skip and some people might not, but that was like 20 or 30 minutes, and it probably shouldn't have been, but it fucking enjoy, I guess. So next time, much like when we followed up on the Geth Telescope and stuff like that, I'll probably follow up on your guys' response to character discussion, if you have it, in the comments next time. And then we'll follow through and try to talk about the remaining 4 party members of Mass Effect Andromeda, I think. And then maybe we'll finally actually talk about the gameplay of this game or something, which I still haven't touched on, or even the story, really, because there's so much to get into. This really is a Mass Effect franchise spoiler cast, with Andromeda being the purpose and filter for it. Because basically I'm just going to be vamping about how great the Mass Effect franchise is to show how bad Andromeda is. And I think that's important. And I do think I'm right, as it turns out. And I think I've posed a lot of evidence for it. And people can no longer call me a mindless fanboy that just arbitrarily decides one is better, old is good, and new is bad. Because fuck if I'm not putting out 100 reasons why. You're welcome to disagree with them, but you can't say my opinions are unfounded at this point, and they're going to only become more founded as we add more parts to the series, which I don't know how long it'll be. I genuinely don't. Because I thought, once again, I'd get through all my notes this episode, and instead I ended up talking about shit that wasn't even in my notes for most of the episode, because fucking synapses are firing and things are connecting, and I'm like, oh my fucking god, I'm learning to respect a game I loved already even more. And we've been over how I'm not immune to its flaws. I know Mass Effect 1 has janky ass gameplay, and its side quests are largely like practically machine written at times, while some of them are really good, to be fair, and how Liara just starts talking about Asari reproduction out of nowhere in the most inappropriate time possible. There's a bunch of bad stuff in Mass Effect 1, but man, there's a reason why I still talk about it 10 years later. And there's a reason why Andromeda's not getting DLC. And I'll just leave it at that.